I want to pique your curiosity, I'll say that, about prayer, about where prayer can go. I have a much longer series on prayer I'm going to do in November. So that's where we're going to end up with this, because as I got into this topic and was reading and studying, I was like, no way can I do all this in 20 or 30 minutes. So we're gonna spend a lot more time on it. But I'm going to give you a tool today, a resource today, that will give you a 40-day walk through prayer that leads to revival. Something that our students studied at camp this summer was revival, and that was kind of a new concept and word to many of them. And so that kind of also bridged into this idea that this resource I'll give you today will talk about how do we pray for revival. A lot of people think of revival as individual, like for a person, and there is an aspect of that, but it can also be community revival. It can also be nation revival. It can also be worldwide revival. So that idea of God renewing, bringing something back that was once alive, and giving that new life or a new lease on life. And so I did a lot, as I mentioned, I did a lot of study on this topic, reading on this topic. And, you know, when I get going with something, I kind of have a one-track mind. I go really deep with that one topic. And I just want you to know the level of sacrifice I put in for studying these things. And it went to even this level. That's right. That's right. I had KFC this week for you, okay? I didn't do it for me. I did the research this week, all right? So I dug into that chicken, and it was wonderful, and it was delicious, and I love KFC, and I'm going to just admit that. It is my favorite chicken, but, and you may say, what's wrong with you? Well, it's close. It's relatively close. I can get to it quickly, right? Is it as good as Grandma's fried chicken? Absolutely not. It's not as good as my mom's chicken. It's not as good as anybody's chicken, but they got it ready right now. Right? It's 5 minutes. I can go get it. It's ready now. It's not, you know, I remember my grandma sometimes we'd get there for lunch and like 3 o'clock's rolling around like, are we eating today? And, you know, the nightly news is coming on. It's lunchtime. I'm like, no, it's not lunch anymore. But, yeah, they're ready to go right now. You can drive up today and in 5 minutes they'll get you through. They'll get you some chicken. It's wonderful. But we all get a sense that it's not quite what fried chicken could be, right? It's not quite where it could be. It's close. And so I ordered KFC takeout this week. I brought it back to my little cave office back there and like a hermit just ate all my chicken. And I did that for you, okay? That was for you because I knew I needed a story to begin this week with. And I wanted to talk about this idea that sometimes we get something, and it could be there's a lot of different ways to apply this, but I ate chicken this week, so it made sense. That we're eating that KFC or that fast food meal, and it's nourishing a little, but we're also kind of the sense of, this isn't really good for me, I shouldn't be eating this. And we're also kind of the sense of, is this real food? I don't know. It kind of is. It's a crutch. It gets us through the moment. I was full after that, and then also a little queasy. And so it gets us through the moment, right? But it's not really as fulfilling as the real meal would have been. And there's not one of you that are eating those mashed potatoes going, oh, that's like Grandma used to make. That's good stuff. You're like, this is like a cream of wheat / oatmeal, weird consistency, but all right, it's going to get me through this moment. And as I was eating this lunch, obviously in my desk chair, right, I was like, okay, it's not the same experience as having that big meal with family. Something is missing. It lacks something special from that moment. And so throughout this series, we've been talking about these things that bring us into the presence of God or kind of usher us into the presence of God. And this today is, again, that thing that kind of gives us this sense of we can get really close but miss out on what God has for us. And I want to talk about that in this context today. I don't know if you have had this happening a lot lately, but a lot of my apps are uninstalling, and it's incredibly frustrating. My phone must be reaching its maximum storage level because my apps keep having this little cloud symbol out the side of them, which means you can't use it right now until you reload it onto your phone. So my apps are automatically uninstalling themselves, and it's so frustrating. I'll go to one that I had one this morning that I literally used yesterday, and I'm like, well, I need that. And so I had to reinstall it this morning, and I had to push it. And I was thinking, it's kind of like that in our life here. We have these things in our life that we want from church. We crave connection. We crave to end loneliness in our life. We want that feeling of belonging. But busyness and technology and our calendars and our individualistic culture often kind of uninstall some of these apps for us to where we're not finding it so useful. And so we'll take substitutes. Cheap imitations. We'll take the KFC meal instead of really experiencing the full fellowship God has intended for us. And the result is pretty easy to understand. Undernourished, biblically illiterate, really lonely because we've leaned too heavily into technology. And so just like fast food, we end up being undernourished spiritually this time. And much like that, it can go for a while. It can get us by for a little bit, but it's not the real fullness of what God had intended. And today we're going to look at that first church in Acts 2, and we're going to see what they were doing. What were the actions of faith that really helped them survive an incredibly terrible period of history and also thrive when they should have been completely eliminated from the face of the planet. Governments were against them. Religious leaders were against them. Powerful religions were against them. And there was dissension within the ranks even. And yet God sustained them. And there were some pretty simple things they were doing that I want to look at today. So we're going to look in Acts chapter 2, verse 42. And I'm going to read just through the end of the chapter there in Acts chapter 2. But worth your while to go back and look at all of Acts 2 at some point to kind of understand the fuller context of everything going on in that church. But I love this because what you see developing, it's almost like a picture developing slowly that you're kind of seeing everything come to light. You're seeing the church. You're seeing the church being born out of the initial stages of Christ's absence, where he goes to be back with the Father, and this group of people starting to kind of materialize into what they're going to become. And so it says in verse 42, all the believers devoted themselves, and here's what they devoted themselves to: the apostles' teaching, and to the fellowship, and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. So, fellowship, teaching, eating together, including communion, and prayer. And so they were devoting themselves to these practices because these are, if you think about it, these are things they do. They sit and they listen to the apostles' teaching. They share, they take time of their life and spend it in fellowship with one another. They talk to one another. They listen to one another. They share food, and they share in the communion together to remember the Lord's death. And then they pray for one another. These things are what solidified that early church. It says in the next verse, in verse 43, what happens as a result of that. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together in the temple each day. They met in homes for the Lord's Supper and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. Their actions created not only growth in their numbers, but also created goodwill with the people amongst whom they lived. They were a blessing to their community, and they also blessed one another. There's a craving for authentic community inside of all of us. And I remember Mark Zuckerberg a few years ago when he was being interviewed about Facebook, and it was still not early, but it was still developing. And he said that Facebook was going to be the new church. He said Facebook was the new church of the world. And yet, if you think about it, there's so many things that church is that Facebook could never even get close to. And a lot of that has to do with just how you can't have 100% of your relationships on Facebook. It doesn't make sense in that way because there's things that are missed in text. There's things that are missed in a technological platform. Marshall McLuhan, a long time ago, wrote this book that wasn't actually very popular when he wrote it, and then you fast forward a few years and we're all reading it and going, boy, he was a prophet, because he kind of said how this was all going to happen with social media. And he basically said that often the medium and the message are connected. And so basically, how you're delivering the message, that is connected to what the message is received as. And so when we filter our relationships through any kind of device, whether it's video dating, VHS tapes, some of you are old enough to remember those kind of weird services, and like those VHS tapes, like that's not a real conversation with a person, right? They're talking and you're hearing, but it's not a real conversation. And in the same way, chat online is not an actual authentic conversation in all the enormity of sitting down to coffee with someone or looking across the table and sharing a meal with someone. There's something different about those things. And so they fundamentally shape how those interactions occur. Have you noticed how easy it is to get angry at someone online? Right? Because I don't have to care about where they're coming from or what life experience they've had, and so it just becomes this little rage machine. Yeah, I disagree strongly with Zuck on this one. I don't think that Facebook can ever be the church. I think it can be a tool, but never the church, because the church offers something very vastly different. There is something in the communion we receive. There's something in the praying and listening to one another. There's something in the voices gathered here together that we sing together. There's something about that gathering that just, it can't be completely replicated through technology. And so these folks in Acts 2 weren't coming together just to get. They were coming together to give. They shared life together. They shared meals, it says. They listened to one another. They prayed for one another. And they even, if someone had a need in their group, they even sold stuff and were generous to make sure those needs were being met. This isn't just a history lesson. This isn't a history lesson about, oh, isn't it neat? That's what the church was like. This is a prescription for what the church is to be and who we are. And who those earliest, I always talk about that. Like if you want to know about Jesus and stuff, I think it's interesting that people are doing modern work in theology, but if I want to know really what Jesus was teaching and how he was teaching his people, I want to hear from the people that were closest to him. I want to hear from the people that walked with Jesus, not people who in the 1890s started to think something different and wrote books. I don't find that all that interesting. I can write books too. I can think of new things. I want to hear about the people who knew Jesus. What were they thinking? And how were they living this life? And that's what you get in Acts chapter 2. You get the people that immediately after Jesus goes to be back with the Father start figuring out, how are we going to exist here with this thing Jesus has told us? The Spirit of God lives in us now, but Jesus is not here physically present with us anymore. That's the kind of people we want to know, because they're the people that were willing so much for their beliefs to go even to themselves to death. And so this is not a history lesson. This is instead an opportunity for us to dive into what Christian community really looks like. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, one of my favorite German theologians, said this about Christian fellowship. He said, a Christian fellowship lives and exists by the intercession of its members for one another, or it collapses. Intercession is a specific kind of prayer. Most of us are familiar with prayers of petition. Petition prayer is where you are asking God for something for yourself. Okay, it's like, we know what the word petition is. People are asking you to sign a petition for whatever. Petitioning is us asking someone else for something. Petition, ask God for what I want. We are familiar with prayers of thanksgiving. Oftentimes we know about praying, God, thank you for this in my life. Prayers of intercession, actually, I was reading one author, and he said in his research, he believes about 70 to 75% of the prayers in the New Testament are intercession-type prayers. So he believes it is much heavier weighted towards that than the other types of prayers. Whereas if we were to evaluate our prayer life, I would propose probably it's opposite for us. I would say probably most of our prayer life are petitions and thanksgiving and not intercession for others as much as we would maybe wish it were. And so intercession is where you're praying for others. So Bonhoeffer, this German theologian, he is saying intercession is the cornerstone of a Christian fellowship. It is how it survives. And outside of that, it doesn't survive. And why? Here's his reasoning. I love his reasoning. I think it's beautiful. He says, I can no longer condemn or hate a brother for whom I pray, No matter how much trouble he causes me, his face, that hitherto may have been strange and intolerable to me, is transformed in intercession into the countenance of a brother for whom Christ died, the face of a forgiven sinner. So, is there someone in this room that annoys you? You're like, yeah, I'm looking at him. Maybe, right? Probably. If not, you may be lying. Is there someone in your family that annoys you? Of course, but you still love them, right? Well, church is not supposed to be a cookie-cutter factory of everyone we perfectly agree with. Church has always, since the beginning, since Acts, always had struggle and tension, and that's okay because we're not here to be right. We're here because we're family. We're drawn together by something bigger than us. And we miss that and we lose that when we don't pray for one another. But when we pray for one another, it's very hard to hate someone that I'm praying for, isn't it? So we're taught to love our enemies, taught to pray for our enemies, pray good for them, bless them. Why? Because it teaches us something. It doesn't force God's hand to bless them. It's teaching us something. I can't hate someone whom I'm praying for, whom I'm asking on behalf of the God of all creation to do something for them. It changes me. Do you ever wonder what it means to be part of a church family? It's not signing a membership card. It's not walking an aisle, raising a hand. There's something deeper to it. There's a meaning that these people really got in Acts chapter 2 that sometimes thousands of years later, we start to lose a little bit of that. But I know absolutely it begins with prayer. It starts with prayer. The genesis of it is in prayer. And it leads us often to listening to people. Because I can pray for you better if I listen to what your needs are. And often it causes, as I pray for you, it causes change in me, and it causes me to serve you or to serve others, to hear a need that is not being met. Or maybe I know someone that could meet that need, and so I connect the need to the person who has the ability or the skill set to do that. See, that's how that works in church. And it commonly erupts as generosity, that people's needs are being met and with no expectation of repayment. It's where I apply the scriptures. It's where it goes from being a neat book of stories to real life, living application of the scriptures. So, if you're looking for a starting point in how church goes from feeling like an organization or feeling like a club of people or a thing you attend and sit in to family, like some people have a challenge bridging that and understanding in their mind. This is where it starts. It starts with prayer for others. Pray for one another. That's where that begins. You can just come and sit in church and listen and partake and go home and it feel very kind of cold, I think. I think that's possible. Not unlike going to a movie theater, right? I go to the movies. I'm going to the movies tonight. I'm seeing Twister tonight. Woo! I'm excited about that. I don't expect any sort of like theater staff to like greet me warmly. I don't expect them to hug me, to ask me how my life's going. I don't know if you've gone to these new coffee places where they do ask you how your life's going. It's a little weird. You know, they're like sitting on your car like, how you doing? What's going on in your life? Tell us your deepest, darkest secrets before you get your coffee. I'm like, hey, stop. Give me the coffee. Move away from the vehicle. And we don't expect that, right? And we've even lost at the grocery store. You remember the greeters at the grocery store and at Walmart and stuff? And be like, sometimes you would get to know them after a while, but they've taken all that away, so we don't get that anymore. So we don't expect that in those places. I don't expect to go to the movie theater and have someone really care about me. I expect them to be cordial. Here's your $40 popcorn. Go sit down, watch the Twister movie. That's about all I expect out of that interaction. But we come to church, and it can feel that way, but there's an opportunity for it to be more like what Jesus had intended his community to be. How do we bridge that gap? That's the question I have. Because I know some people that have gone to church and said, I didn't get that experience. And then I know some people that have become closer than family at church, right? So how do we walk that, and how do we see that working together? Well, I think, again, it begins with praying for one another. Check this out. Ephesians chapter 6, Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, he says, be prepared. You're up against far more than you can handle on your own. I underline that because I think it's such an impactful phrase. You are up against far more than you can handle on your own. You're not meant to try to handle all this on your own. So prayer is essential in this, he says, warfare, spiritual warfare in your life. Heavy stuff. Pray hard and long. Pray for your brothers and your sisters. Keep your eyes open. Keep each other's spirits up so that no one falls behind or drops out. So when you look across the room, it's not just pray for the people that look like you, act like you, talk like you. It's pray for everyone. It is pray for your brothers and your sisters so that no one, not even the weakest, falls behind. Not even the person that projects energy and strength falls behind. And in the New Testament, and particularly in Jewish culture, brothers and sisters, that family bond was very strong, understood differently than it is today, because they were bonded for life. They didn't choose that relationship, but they were bonded for life. And so to call in the church people that are unrelated brothers and sisters had very significant language choice. And that is this idea that we are bonded together in that way. We may not always see eye to eye. Those of you, I don't know, I don't have siblings, but those of you that have siblings have told me from time to time you get irritated with your siblings. I've heard that before. But there's something deeper there when you grow up with someone and you understand there's something bigger that bonds you together. And there's a love there. And so by calling us brothers and sisters, we are brought into this relationship to where we've been asked to take a moment to pray for their good and for God to intercede on their behalf, to encourage them so they're not left behind. It brings up this idea to me that we are not just a club. We're not just another organization in the community, right? And I think it can get confusing. Sometimes people see that and they think that we are just another club. And it's like, well, no, we're not really a club. We're more akin to a family. And there's a lot of pressure on churches to do certain things, act certain ways, put on a certain level of production. And Acts 2 shows us what happens when we think of this opportunity on Sundays as more of a rally point, more of a beginning, more of a starting line. And we think of what happens tomorrow as more of the beginning of our religious experience in that week. How we interact in the world, how we interact at work, how we interact with our neighbors, how we interact with our family. That's really the work of the church. And that what we do on Sunday is more like a part we come to be energized and refreshed and encourage and pray for one another and listen to one another. And it should shape our prayer throughout the week. It should shape what we think about and how we do that. So this week, my challenge to you is this. As we're sent out today, I want you to think about what you will do to move beyond where you are right now. If you're not to the level where you feel like this is your family, take that next step. I remember coming home one time and crying to my dad when I moved to school. It was a new school to me, and I was like, I don't have any friends, and no one likes me. And I just remember, like, this is one of those core memories that you have as a kid. And I had a poster on my wall, and I don't know how it got there. I don't think I hung it up. But anyway, it had a puppy, and it was a beagle, and it said, if you want a friend, be a friend. And some of you have seen that poster because they sold it for years at, like, book fairs and stuff. But if you want a friend, be a friend. And my dad just pointed to it, and he said, look, you've got to, if you want friends, you've got to be friendly to people. You've got to go out of your way. And I never thought about it like that. And to you, I would say, I think it's very similar for us. If we want church to feel more like family, then we have to be family to people. We have to take that upon ourselves. And I think the most easy starting point is listening to people and praying for people, because it fundamentally shapes your perspective on their life. It fundamentally makes you less judgmental. It makes you more open. It makes you more empathetic. It makes you feel what they're feeling and put their shoes on. And it helps you to shape who you are. So maybe it's coffee after church or later this week with somebody. Maybe it's a lunch invitation. Maybe it's joining a prayer group that reads the Bible together this fall when we do that again. We gather back together because those are great opportunities, little microcosms of families, groups. Maybe it's like those in the early church. You're just figuring out how to use your gifts to bless others. Because at the end of the day, we're all family. And I talk about Cousin Eddie principle a lot. This is the Cousin Eddie principle. The family loves Eddie, even though he's nuts, right? I mean, here he is emptying the RV into the sewer, and he's wanting some of this garbage. But they love him. And I always say, if you don't know if you have a Cousin Eddie, you probably are Cousin Eddie, so. And here's the thing. God sees something in every single one of us. God sees something in you and loves you. And what you've got to understand is if that is true, if God sees something in you and loves you, God sees something in every single one of his creations. Even if you can't see it. Even if you're like, well, they're a diamond in the rough. Or you say they're just a rough. God sees something in every one of his creations. And that shapes fundamentally how we treat people and how we see them. Because God loves all of his creation. And so you can pray for them. And you can pray to God for them. Because even the people you can't understand and you're just like, what are they thinking? Who are they? What are they doing? God has room for them. I love what Nouwen said. He said, in the house of God, there are many mansions. There's a place for everyone. A unique, special place. Once we deeply trust that we ourselves are precious in God's eyes, we are able to recognize the preciousness of others and their unique places in God's heart. So if you accept that truth, that God loves you deeply and you are precious in his eyes and he cares for you, then the opposite also has to be true. That person you don't understand, that person that challenges you, they are precious to him too. My big idea for you today is that at Coffee Creek, everybody is family, not just another face in the crowd. We're all family, but it does take work to get to that level. It's not like bloodline family. You're just born in. You can't pick your siblings. Here you get to pick. Here you get to be a part of that or not. You choose that. And it takes a little bit of effort for that to really take root in you. But how you become family begins with this idea of prayer. And so I hope, my goal, and many of us, our dream for Coffee Creek is that we become, over the years, a place known in the community where people who had never been here before know of us in the community as a place where people not only find Jesus, but where they find genuine, life-giving family, people that care about them, that will listen to them. They know we're not a movie theater. They know we have no show to put on. This is not Branson, clearly. We don't have the best preacher in the world. He's not the most gifted speaker. This is not Billy Graham in front of you. But what we do have is an environment that we've worked very hard to curate, where people can be known, can share their gifts and talents, can be generous with one another, where we can develop the next generation, where we can pray for one another. And that, my friends, is unique and is different and is countercultural to what's happening all around us right now.